Let's break down 3 running backs and 3 wide receivers, as well as a quarterback and tight end who are going into week 14 with bust potential. These players could end up hurting you due to overall slumps or matchups as we approach one of the most important weeks of fantasy football on the entire season yet. All right, let's kick the video off with Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. Listen, I thought Chuba might be a bust in Week 12, and he came through for you in a tough matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs with 15 total fantasy points, 58 yards on the ground, a touchdown, 3.63 yards per carry was not bad in that game. Chuba's been very good on the season, right? We all know this. He's the RB12 so far on the season. He has 3 single-digit fantasy performances so far on the year, and that's it. But this past week was one of those single-digit performances, and it felt like the most worrisome, to say the least. 2.3 fantasy points, the fumble at the end of the game. That is essentially the reason the Panthers lost that game. I know a lot happened in that game overall, but 12 touches, 43 yards on the ground wasn't awful, 3.58 yards per carry. But something was off here, right? And then we also saw the most volume that Jonathan Brooks has had on the entire season yet, although he's only played in 2 games, right? But 6 touches for Jonathan Brooks and then 3 targets, 3 catches for Jonathan Brooks, as well as multiple touches inside the 20-yard line. So listen, overall, I'm still not completely ready to panic about Jonathan Brooks, like taking over this backfield, completely taking it from Chuba Hubbard. But all those factors, if you're a Chuba Hubbard owner, you're lying if you tell me they don't bother you just a little bit, right? But what bothers me the most this week, of course, is a tough matchup on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles defense that overall is fantastic, that I think could kind of put a little bit of a slump to this Panthers offensive rise that we've seen over the past couple of weeks, but also is fantastic against the run, giving up the 4th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. So I know it's a tough week. I know we have 6 teams on bye week this week, but you got to look at your options this week. Chuba Hubbard may end up being a player that you want to bench going into week 14, given the circumstances and given this tough matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. All right, next up, let's take a look at another running back who's been in a little bit of a slump lately. That's Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings, who overall in the season, once again, has been solid. He's a top 20 fantasy football running back. He's given you single digits just 4 times on the season, right? But we look since week 8. The ceiling, for the most part, has almost disappeared for Aaron Jones. He has 12.2 or less fantasy points in every single game, except for week 12 against the Chicago Bears, right? But the other thing going on with Aaron Jones as of late is he has at least 1 fumble in 3 straight games, 2 lost fumbles in the last 2 games, and 4 overall fumbles in the last 3 games, right? But he's kind of found a way to salvage himself, right? He had the game-winning touchdown this past week, which was a receiving touchdown. The week before that, he at least had that rushing touchdown and still had a fine fantasy day even with the lost fumble. But the fumbles have definitely kind of made you scratch your head as of late. But I will say there doesn't seem to be any true competition in terms of anyone stealing touches here. Cam Akers has 4 or less touches in 2 straight weeks, and Ty Chandler had 2 touches this past week, but outside of that, he's barely done anything over the past couple weeks. So it still seems to be Aaron Jones' backfield, but overall the ceiling has been lower for quite a few weeks. I still think he's one of these players that you can put in as a floor, has a chance to score, all of that stuff, but what is the real ceiling that you're getting out of Aaron Jones? And then, of course, we have a tough matchup as the Atlanta Falcons have allowed the 11th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs, and they have been a tough run defense all season long. They're a pass funnel defense, They are bad against the pass. We know that, but they're stout up front, right? So I'm just worried. I think this is going to be one of those games that Sam Darnold can come out, throw quite a bit. The Atlanta Falcons secondary is not going to be a match for what Sam Darnold has been doing over the past couple of weeks with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, these guys are doing. And Aaron Jones gets some volume in the passing game, don't get me wrong. And like I said, and like I always say in these videos, you don't have to outright bench any of the players in today's videos. We're just taking a guess at who maybe is going to have a lower ceiling or end up hurting you on this given week, right? And Aaron Jones just might be one of these players this week who comes through with a little bit of a lower ceiling. Yeah, he can always score, but what is he really going to do for you in week 14? That is the question that you have to ask. Last running back we're going to take a look at is Gus Edwards of the LA Chargers. And I have gotten questions already throughout the week about Gus Edwards because we're in this Biocalypse Part 2. We got 6 teams on bye week, right? And this was one of the only options that you could really pick up off the waiver wire this week at running back who gives you a shot at RB1 volume. But man, you guys know I hate this matchup as the Chiefs have allowed the fewest fantasy points to the running back position, right? And so the matchup's awful, right? And the Chargers on the road here. The Chiefs have been a lot weaker lately against the pass, and they're a little banged up in the secondary. They're not great against quarterbacks and tight ends, so that also makes you worried about Gus Edwards. Once again, maybe they get some drives together. Gus Edwards can score, bring a floor, but you look at last week, 6 touches, 32 yards on the ground, 1 target, 1 reception. I mean, Gus Edwards in relief of J.K. Dobbins has done hardly anything. And then, you got Kamani Vidal had 4 touches this past week. Hassan Haskins had 1 touch, which he did nothing with. But there are other running backs involved here for the Chargers as well. So Gus Edwards, I just want to reiterate, he is a true desperation play going into Week 14. You want to avoid this situation if you can. This is a play in deep dynasty leagues, 16-team leagues, and even in that scenario, you are crossing every finger that you have. So Gus Edwards is a complete avoid for me. He's only rostered in 57% of leagues, but like I said, getting questions about him, you don't want to force yourself to start Gus Edwards by any means whatsoever this week. He definitely has bust potential written all over him going into Week 14. And Gus Edwards' current rushing yard line on Underdog sits at 33.5 rushing yards. He has not hit that in 3 straight weeks. This is a pretty low line, but if I'm going to take a lower this week, it's going to be Gus Edwards, lower on rushing yards as he gets the most difficult matchup possible going up against this Kansas City Chiefs run defense. So head straight to Underdog. Take the risk, take the lower on Gus Edwards' total rush yards. If you don't know, when you sign up on Underdog using promo code TheCatch, that link is down below, you're going to get a free NFL Pick Em to use towards Week 14's action. Take your free Pick Em, take the lower on Gus Bust's lower rushing yards. Once both of those lines hit, you'll automatically triple your cash entry. And on top of that, when you guys sign up on Underdog using promo code TheCatch, that link is down below, you will also receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So that's a free NFL Pick 'em to use towards this week's action on Underdog and up to $1,000 in bonus cash on Underdog when you sign up with promo code TheCatch. All right, first wide receiver I want to talk about is a wide receiver that I've been pretty high on all season long, and that's Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, who's averaging 15.1 fantasy points per game. He's a wide receiver 14 thus far on the season. But I've tried to keep my faith over the past couple weeks in Garrett Wilson, and it's just been tough to do so. He's had 9.1 or less fantasy points in 3 straight games, and this Jets offense just has a big question mark written all over it. We look at last week, Devontae Adams, more targets than Garrett Wilson. The week before, Devontae Adams just 1 less target than Garrett Wilson. The week before that, 13 targets for Adams, just 6 for Garrett Wilson. The week before that, more targets to Adams than Garrett Wilson. And plus, it just kind of feels like once they get near the red zone, like Aaron Rodgers only wants to throw to Devontae Adams. There's just so many problems right now. Like, is Breece Hall even going to play? What type of Aaron Rodgers are we going to get this week? And what does that all mean for Garrett Wilson? Well, like I said, in the past couple weeks, it hasn't meant good things for Garrett Wilson, especially fantasy-wise, right? And really that long streak he had of double-digit games. He only had 1 single-digit game between weeks 1 and 9, and that was that awful rain game against Denver and Pat Surtain and all of that, right? So Wilson had been phenomenal on the season. Had that huge Week 9 performance, and then has just been in this slump over the past couple weeks, and it feels like this Jets offense has been in a slump the past couple weeks. And now he gets the Miami Dolphins, who are giving up the 2nd fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, and this is a road game for the Jets. I just don't feel very good here. Now, the Dolphins secondary last week didn't look as great. Jaden Reed came through in that matchup, right? They allowed some plays to Christian Watson. Tucker Kraft had a decent game. But overall, I still am worried about Garrett Wilson this week. So you just got to look at what you have. And I still think Garrett Wilson can wrap up the season nicely. He gets Jacksonville in week 15. Good matchup against the Rams in week 16. Then another tough matchup in week 17 in the fantasy playoffs. But this is one of those situations. I just want you to look at what you have. Do you have a play with more upside? Maybe consider that. I know Wilson has still been a player that I've loved on the season, but you got to look at the past couple of weeks. Then you got to look at this matchup against the Dolphins and definitely wonder, is this the best play that I have going into week 14? All right, next up we have a player that I encouraged you guys strongly to start last week. Encourage you guys over the past couple of weeks to pick up off the waiver wire, and that's Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers, coming off of a great fantasy day against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 23.9 fantasy points, 10 targets, 8 catches, 99 receiving yards, and a touchdown. But that was against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this week he gets the Philadelphia Eagles. We talked about Chuba Hubbard earlier. Now we're going to take a look at Adam Thielen, who once again, I think Thielen might be a decent floor play. But this Philadelphia Eagles defense right now is playing as one of the best defenses in the whole league, and they're allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. We got the exciting Whites at cornerback, and they are not messing around. They have been almost locked down completely for the past couple of weeks outside of that game against the Rams, right? So I do worry about Adam Thielen this week because, what real threat at wide receiver is there on this team outside of Adam Thielen? And, even then, we've only seen Thielen, really play. He hasn't even played in more than 5 games on the season. He only has 2 double-digit games on the season. Just had a really nice game last week. Should have had 2 touchdowns last week, right? Should have had an even better day. But I know Xavier Leggett has had moments on the season. He's been okay as of late. And David Moore popped up out of nowhere against Kansas City 2 weeks ago. But I just don't know if this Carolina Panthers receiving core is a real threat to what Philadelphia is doing right now defensively. And like I said earlier in the video, giving all the flowers to Bryce Young, Dave Canales, this Panthers offense, everything they've been able to do over the past couple of weeks. And we've talked about that over the past couple of weeks and actually had some faith in them, right? But this matchup on the road, I am worried that maybe that momentum starts to slow down a little bit. I think they can pick it back up in week 15 against Dallas, and they get Arizona, Tampa Bay. There are other opportunities, especially against Tampa Bay in the fantasy championship. But here in week 14, I would not force yourself to start Adam Thielen. He's nothing more than a floor play, and this matchup makes me really worried as we move into the week. All right, last but not least, at wide receiver, we have Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers, who made last week's video, and we talked about him in week 12's video a little bit alongside Ricky Pearsall. And going into week 14, Deebo is going to face Jalen Johnson and the Chicago Bears secondary, who have allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Now, there's definitely a chance that Jalen Johnson sees more of Jawan Jennings in this game, which makes me a little worried about Jawan Jennings, who's also playing at a little bit of a lower ceiling as of late. But yeah, Deebo, it's just kind of head scratching. I know that the Niners offensively and overall are just not playing as good right now. But Deebo over the past couple weeks, 6.1 fantasy points, 3.1 fantasy points, 4 fantasy points. Then the 2 previous games, he at least got you double digits, but does 12.6 fantasy points in each of those games and has only averaged 9.9 fantasy points on the season. Started out the year, looking okay, 18.7, 18 points, missed a week, 10.2. A bummer game in week 5 with 3 points, then 20.7, then a goose egg, right, where he got hurt in that week 7 game. And then the 2 12.6 games were oh, okay, we can, I guess, manage this because he's still Deebo. He might pop off. But then we got what we got over the past 3 weeks, 6.1 or less in 3 straight games with a bottom of 3.1 fantasy points. And I know last week, we don't want to read too much into it. It was the snow game. McCaffrey goes down, Warner's banged up, Trent Williams not playing. Come on, it just feels like disaster season for the Niners. But it still makes me worried about Deebo going into this week. And I said it going into last week. I am worried about Brock Purdy. I don't think Brock Purdy is fully healthy. I think that's going to affect the play of a lot of these Niners pass catchers. So I feel better about Jennings. I feel better about Kittle. But Deebo's just kind of in this place where something seems off. He doesn't feel as explosive, doesn't feel as fast, doesn't even really feel as involved in the offense as a whole. So if you own Deebo, this is not a great matchup. He still has opportunities coming up. He gets the Rams in week 15, Detroit, pretty good matchup in week 17, has a tough matchup against Miami in week 16, but I'm just worried about Deebo this week. I don't know if he's the best start for you guys, so make sure you're looking at your roster, seeing what else you got, because Deebo could end up being a bust for the 4th straight week. All right, let's go over one quarterback, and I'm going to take a look at Matthew Stafford of the LA Rams. And listen, Stafford has been a pretty good streaming option for the most part over the past couple weeks. He sits at 55% rostered, and let's see here. In 3 of his last 5 games, he has 18 or more fantasy points with a ceiling of 27.8 fantasy points against the Patriots. But this past week, a lower ceiling game, 15.6 points against the Saints, was 14 of 24, 183 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and that's not really that bad. He just didn't throw for a lot of passing yards, and Kyren Williams had a pretty good day in the run game, right? So maybe we don't want to read too much into that, but he did get a little bit banged up, a little bit of an ankle issue going on for Matthew Stafford that popped up in that game last week against the Saints. Now, he has been practicing in full. Matthew Stafford is kind of known for playing through these types of injuries, right? But we do have this potential injury that is lingering going into the week. And now he's going up against the Buffalo Bills, who are allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, and they're allowing the fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So I kind of worry about Stafford going into the week. I know that it's the Biocalypse Part 2. I know that you might have Lamar Jackson on bye week. You might have Jaden Daniels on bye week. Maybe you got Bo Nix on bye week, right? And he might be looking for a streaming option. There are still a lot of streaming options out there that offer better upside. We put out our sneaky starts and streams for the week. You guys can check out that video that has some very good streaming candidates at quarterback that are lowly rostered and guys that I feel a little bit more comfortable about going into the week than I do with Stafford. Tough matchup here. I see a lower ceiling game for Stafford. Of course, he's Stafford. Can always do Stafford things. He does have 2 or more passing touchdowns in every game except for 1 since week 8. But I worry that we get closer to what we got in week 10 against Miami or week 13 against the Saints, which is between 10 and 15 fantasy points here in week 14 against Buffalo. So look at your options. There might be something out there better than Matthew Stafford when it comes to the quarterback position in week 14. And let's wrap up with one tight end, and let's talk about Kyle Pitts of the Atlanta Falcons, who has found himself in quite the slump over the past month. 9.5 or less fantasy points in 4 straight games, 2.1 or less fantasy points in 3 of those 4 games. And last week, 0 fantasy points, a true goose egg. So I find it incredibly difficult to trust Kyle Pitts as of late. He now is getting the Minnesota Vikings, who are allowing the 11th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. I have heard the argument that this Vikings pass rush is going to be all over Kirk Cousins. He's going to need to dump the football off a lot this week, and that could benefit our guy Kyle Pitts. We'll see if that theory comes true. But overall, I have a very difficult time throwing Kyle Pitts into my starting lineup with so much on the line in one of the most crucial weeks, if not the most crucial week of the fantasy season so far. So there are a lot of streaming options, once again, at tight end that I think might suit you guys better. Of course, Pitts can always have one of these games where you're like, oh my gosh, why did I drop Kyle Pitts? Why did I not start Kyle Pitts? But man, I just worry that we're going to be closer to one of these lower point total games. And as of late, like I said, that's 2.1 or less fantasy points. It's a scary place to be, especially when you guys are trying to secure a playoff spot or secure certain playoff seeding, whatever. So Kyle Pitts, very worried about him. He still is 81% rostered. I've dropped Kyle Pitts in a league or two because I'm in must-win scenarios or scenarios where I'm trying to lock up particular playoff seeding, right? And I just am not risking it. And I worry about you guys. If you are going to risk Kyle Pitts this week, I would try to look elsewhere at the tight end position. And that'll do it for today's video. There are 8 potential busts going into week 14 of the 2024 fantasy football season. As always, guys, I'm answering as many fantasy football questions as I possibly can in the comment section down below. So if you guys need anything whatsoever moving into the week, be sure to drop me a comment. I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. But most importantly, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out on any of the content, because we're going to have every single thing that you guys need here on the channel every single day for the rest of the fantasy season to help you guys dominate the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. So make sure that you are subscribed so that you don't miss out on any of the videos. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.